Good evening and welcome to our virtual Wayland Library event. Tonight we're excited to have Peter Curran here for our monthly Great Presenter series. Peter has been teaching visual art since 2004 with nearly 10 years at a pre-K special education school in Lancaster, Mass, and currently at Wayland Middle School. Pete studied art education at Syracuse University and Mass College of Art and Design. He's worked with a variety of statewide and national arts organizations, most recently with the National Art Education Association Middle Level Division as the director, as a lead ambassador for DESI's 2019 Arts Frameworks Professional Development Series, and as a member of the Mass Art Education Association Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Task Force. Pete is a practicing artist, blending design, sculpture, video, and photography, and he lives in Wayland with his wife and 2 daughters. So thank you so much to Pete for being here this evening. I have a couple Zoom housekeeping notes. While I admit one more person, there we go. All right, first, Pete will be leading us through an interactive session. So let's offer our generosity of spirit and respect for one another this evening. And please stay muted unless you are inspired to ask a question or add a comment. Or if you're more comfortable, you're welcome to type in comments and questions into the chat. Second, we're recording this session for broadcast on Waycam, our local cable access channel, and for posting on YouTube. And I will be recording Pete's face only, but everyone's voices. So now that I've got that out of the way, I will hand it over to Pete.
Well, thank you, Courtney. Thank you for everybody for joining us tonight. Sorry about my Zoom muting. We were just talking about at the middle school, it's nice to be out of the Zoom realm for a little bit. And I jumped right back in. All right, so thank you all for joining us today. So we're going to be talking about some of the strategies we use at the middle school where I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in the visual arts. So over the course of the year, I get to see all of our middle school students, and I also get to see them from 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. We typically meet about twice a week, given some different schedules throughout the years. And it's I think my 7th year teaching at the middle school, and it's been a really great journey up to now. So part of what we get to do tonight is I get to share some of the great work that some of the students at the middle school have been creating. So it's kind of an extra bonus for me to be able to share that with y'all. So I titled the talk tonight, Unstuck, Breaking the Barriers to Creativity. If you'd like to play along, you'll see at the top right, it says you could have a writing utensil, like a pen or a pencil, and a little scrap piece of paper, nothing fancy, just Post-it will do, or back of an envelope or something. And we'll get started. You'll see here I did have a link to some of the resources, or there's a handout if you do the QR code, you can do that. I think I can also put, what I could put that in the chat for folks. Let me see if I can put that in the chat. Let me see if that works. So you can try that. It should take you to an online folder where I've put some of the handouts. So you can feel free to try that chat that's in or try the link that's in the chat. Okay. All right. So before I start, I do feel it's important to make sure I kind of name the biases that I'm working with and dealing with. So unpacking my suitcase, I identify as a white, cisgendered, straight male. I live and work in a predominantly white middle-class suburb. I've been teaching since 2004, and I use the pronouns he, him, and his. And I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm physically presenting from the traditional lands of the Pawtucket, the Nipmuc, and the Massachusetts tribal nations. And I shared this just to remind us what we're here for. So I pulled this from the announcement of the series announcement. So it says, we'll examine the notion of creativity, share our own stories, admire some recent artwork by our Wayland Middle School students, and perhaps make some drawings of our own. You'll leave with a handful of new tools for your own creative toolkit, as well as a deeper appreciation for the creative power of our community's young artists. So that's kind of what I have. That was what was in my mind as I was putting this together. We're going to try and cover 3 target areas. We're going to cover some classroom culture. So what I mean by that is kind of how do I set up my middle school classroom to kind of enable this creativity and to really kind of allow the students that, I guess, that room to play with ideas and concepts and techniques and materials, that sort of thing. I'm going to cover some of the curricular supports we use that kind of allow the students to kind of try out new things and build that creative, kind of that skill set for being creative. And the last piece we're going to focus on is just peer relationships. And I should mention that I approach this from my experience, which is coming from the classroom experience, right? And it's, you know, I work primarily with 11 to 14-year-olds. And I hope that throughout the talk tonight, you can kind of connect with the concepts that we're sharing and see if you can like apply that to your own, you know, creative journey and what you do in your own creative work. Okay. All right, so let's get started. All right, so we'll start with the classroom culture. So how do we set the stage for the creative experience? And I think this is important to start here because it sort of shares kind of where my thinking around creativity has grown and kind of the foundations of it. And that's what I try to espouse with the students. As you walk in the hallway into my classroom, a student a couple years ago created this mural on the right that's above the doorway walking down, and it's a quote from Peter Reynolds, and like one of my like kind of seminal books that I go back to is The Dot. If you've never read it, it's a picture book about a student who, you know, creates a dot and, you know, they have to sign it, and there's a fun story about kind of really unpacking the creative power in just making a mark. So above our door, as you walk into the hallway for the art room, it says, make a mark and see where it takes you, which I love. The way that I've structured my curriculum and the learning course at the middle school is I kind of break it down into 3 main questions, like essential questions for each grade. With 6th grade, we focus mainly on materials and techniques and trying things out, combining things, see what happens. So we say, how do we make marks? And then in 7th grade, we sort of shift that thinking a little bit and we say, why do we make marks? Which is kind of the quintessential like 7th grade middle school, like, why are we doing this, right? So it kind of pushes it to thinking like, what is the purpose of art making in general, okay? And then in 8th grade, we talk about how do we leave our mark? Because, you know, by that time they've spent 2.5 years with me, and it's, you know, we're prepping them for the high school where they can go on to bigger and better things, and we're excited to see what they create up at the high school. So we're asking, how do you take what you, how do you leave your impact on the people around you and space around you? So we're going to start with just kind of a basic question. This might be where you might want to jot some notes down. We might use the chat too, if you feel comfortable using the chat, or if you'd like to unmute, we can try it that way. I'm going to ask you, what are we talking about when we talk about creativity? So I'm going to give you a quick little thinking challenge, and you can jot some notes down if you'd like. But I'm going to challenge you to use only 6 words and jot down your idea for a definition of creativity. And I'll give you about 75 seconds, so 1.25 minutes. And if you'd like to share it in the chat once you figure it out, feel free. And then at the end of, I guess, a minute now, I'll ask if anybody wants to share it, you know, by unmuting. You're welcome to. So take about 60 seconds. What do you think your definition for creativity is? All right, so if you'd like to share it in the chat, go for it. And if you'd like to unmute, feel free to unmute and share it. This might get if we start talking over each other, we might have to pull back. So if you notice somebody's talking, just wait your turn. But if you'd like to unmute, I'd love to hear what your definition is. So it looks like Steve Engler shared it's self-expression. I'm curious what other people would say. We have, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing names incorrectly, but it says, Elizabeth says, free form expression of humanity through media. Oh, I like that. Is 6 words. You got it. Philip Cohen says, new beginning, free, outside the box, uncensored, questions open, out of box. Oh, I like this. Let's see. Unboundaried. Oh, I like that. I feel like we need to trademark that word. That's a good one. Use imagination to make something new, imagining an inner spirit coming to being. I love that, coming to being. That's fantastic. And unlimited. Yeah, so like the boundaries come off, right? We're unboundaried, we're unlimited, thinking outside the box. So I like where we're all going. I think we're kind of in that space of like really pushing sort of the boundaries of things and thinking beyond sort of where we may think we're supposed to be. Somebody shared innovative or remixing. I like the remixing. I think that's a very kind of current thing where a lot of students are kind of taking things that they find and repackaging them and putting them back out to the world. All right, lovely. Thank you for everybody for sharing that. So I'm going to share one that I heard a couple years ago, actually at a Wayland Library event, where our speaker, Teresa Amabile, and I am terribly sorry if I'm pronouncing her last name incorrectly, but she shared when she defined creativity, she said it's novel ideas that work. And I remember I was in the audience for that talk, and I was excited by the simplicity, yet the possibility of that definition. And I've stayed with that for ever since I heard that talk. I really go back to that a lot, and I share this with my students when I challenge them to define creativity. And when we think about creativity, for me, I think it's important to kind of think about the bases of kind of knowledge that I've built this definition. So taking that idea of novel ideas that work and kind of attributing to the research that I've done in my own work, and I like to sort of share that today. So you'll see, sorry, I went ahead too far. The idea of a growth mindset and the term grit in education circles, these have been kind of floating around for the last couple of years. And I've really kind of enjoyed how I can pull from that and put it into my own practice. We're going to look at the Kaufman and Baghetto's 4 C's of creativity and how that kind of blends with the growth mindset and grit. And I also pull a lot of what I do from the D school or the design school at Stanford, and I'll show some of the work that I've looked at there. Okay. So I start, if you've heard of Carol Dweck's work in the book, this is probably her most well-known current book, is Mindset, is about kind of the growth mindset of, like, you'll hear some students will say like yet, so adding yet at the end of a statement. So instead of saying I can't do this, it's I can't do this yet. And that the power of yet, and you'll hear teachers talk about the power of yet sometimes, is that possibility of like, well, I just need to keep working on it, right? And you combine that with the work of Angela Duckworth and her ideas about grit and sort of sticking with persevering through challenges to achieve something that's, you know, bigger than yourself, right? So kind of having long-term goals and doing the work that really gets you to where you want to be. I think those are concepts that I try to infuse into my classroom. And then I mix that with the 4 C's model of creativity from Kaufman and Baghetto, where you have the mini C, the little c, the pro C, and the big C. And this is how I like to explain creativity to some of my students, especially the students that maybe don't see themselves as art makers or creators. We talk a lot about this in like a kind of a middle school appropriate conversation. We talk about the mini C, which is sort of those little tiny things that students will do, like mixing paint is an example that I put here, like, oh, like the kids that kind of figure out how to mix colors, that little sort of spark that happens of just sort of saying like, oh, I wonder what this does if I put it together. Those little moments are kind of the mini C. And then you have what's called the little C, or little creativity, which is sort of like just what a lot of my students are doing now, right? So it's just, they're trying out new ideas, trying techniques, concepts, that sort of thing. So I included a pen and ink drawing from one of my 8th graders this year, just really pushing themselves to try something new. You see like some of the brush work or the ink, the pen work that they're doing to create some of the textures and the shading there. And then you have what's called pro-C, or professional creativity, like people who are professional creators, right? So this is a sculptor named Eko Namako. He's known best for like creating these freeform Lego sculptures that are pretty impressive to look at. And then you have big C, which is sort of like the big shifts in creativity. So I included sort of like when you think about like, you know, Apple and what Apple has done, like those big shifts in like whole systems, right? So you have the mini C, the little c, the pro C, and the big C. Okay. And then we combine that with some of the work that is being done over at the Institute of Design at Stanford, or the D School. And I apply this to some of the work we do in the school, where it's sort of shifting students from thinking art has to just be something that's pretty or looks good, and sort of really kind of pushing them to consider what art has the power to do. So in 7th grade, if you remember, my essential question for my 7th graders is, why do we make marks? So we do more of a design angle during 7th grade. We do an invention project where we present our ideas visually for how we solve a problem. And we do some self-portrait work where we sort of share a visual from our past, like that explains, you know, something about who we are. So we're talking about using art to communicate with people around us, right? So I think earlier somebody said creativity is about self-expression. So it's kind of digging into like, what does that mean? What's the purpose of self-expression? What's the point? And how does art fit into that? And one of the models at the D School uses sort of certain stages in their design process. So they talk about, you start with empathy. You think about, you know, listening to the people that you're speaking to, like, what do they need? You talk about defining issues or defining the problem and kind of making it clear what you're trying to solve or what you're trying to achieve. They talk about ideating, or I love this verb. So it's coming up with new ideas, new approaches. Like how many people said thinking outside the box earlier, right? That's this phase right here of the design process. You talk about prototyping, where you're taking that idea that's floating in your head and you make it visible for the people around you, and the power of making it visual for folks to understand your thinking. And then we talk about the final stage, which I think is, and a lot of times it's most important, is we test it out, right? So in the art room, that's critiquing, looking at people's work, responding to work, trying it out, seeing if it works, getting feedback, that sort of thing. So I use this in my classroom. And actually a couple of years ago, my colleagues at the school, we all kind of got together and we realized we were all using different models. So I was using the design process from the D School. Some people were using some other resources. And what we did is we ended up, as a school, we put our heads together and we came up with our own sort of like core stages or phases of the design process, which leads you to what the visual here is on the right, where we have empathy at the center, or at the heart of what we do. And we talk about exploring, developing, and evaluating our work as we go. And another resource that I've really enjoyed using, that's really kind of crafted kind of how I envision my space at the middle school, is this book called Make Space. And it talks about how your space can communicate the potential for creativity, right? So if you're asking the students to be creative, or if you're asking yourself to be creative, is the space that you're in allowing for that to happen? And it was a really great resource for me, and it's just been on my shelf ever since I found it. And that being said, I did want to take a minute. I was going to give you a little chance to check out the art room at the middle school. So I took a little video, or it's not a video, it's like I'm drawing a blank on what these are called. It's like a VR sort of experience of the space. So, all right, this one looks like it's loaded. So you can see that our tables are set up. This is actually not how it looks currently. Currently, because of restrictions and spacing, we have individual desks this year, but ideally we'll go back to this more communal kind of collaborative space. You'll see that the supplies in the room, the storage spaces, all the materials and the tools I typically try to keep them pretty accessible. I think a big part of my practice is just how I set up my room. And I'll share with the students a lot of times that, if you have a great idea, I don't want you trying to find the material to be the reason that you don't get to try that idea out. So I've set my room up so things are very accessible. I try to keep it as stocked as it can be. I try to keep as many supplies and variety of supplies available for students. People have learned that they can just drop off recycled stuff, like, hey, I cleaned out my attic and I found, all this stuff, and I'll find a place for it, right? And the students tend to use it pretty quickly. So I think creating the space and establishing that set of kind of accessibility so that the ideas can just kind of flow is really important to how I've set my space up. And I think for me too, as a creator myself, I think if you look in my supplies for my own personal art making, I just have shelves and files and cabinets full of like just random knickknacks and things so if anything pops into my head, I don't want to sit there and say, well, I don't have that thing right now, so I can't do that. I try to keep things accessible so that if I have a brainstorm, I can jump right in and keep trying it out. And I'll leave this section of the talk just with this question here, and it sort of drives how I crafted my practice over the years, is who owns the learning? And I ask that a lot of times in that, if I know as the teacher how it's going to turn out, right? If I know exactly how every student is going to create their work, if I can picture it in my head before it starts, the learning in that sense is really owned by me, right? So there are parts where I have to pull back and encourage the students to kind of fill in some gaps so that they can share in the learning process and they can take ownership of their learning. And there's sort of a mystery there that as the teacher, sometimes it's a little scary because you're like, I don't know where this is going to go. But I think it's really important that I stay true to that that aspect of my teaching. So that is how I set up my classroom. So I've given you a little insight into what we do at the classroom. And we're going to move into some of the curricular supports that we try to create and establish in my classroom. So these are the tools that I provide my students. Okay, so with this part, you'll see there are a couple sort of strategies that we use in the middle school classroom to kind of get over that barrier or get over the hump of sort of being like, I don't know what to do right now, right? And I think when I created these, I've actually kind of espoused them in my own brain as I'm working, and I'll use some of these in my own artwork. I remember the poster that I put up in my classroom. So when I share these, I do realize that like I personally have utilized them as well. Okay, so I'll share some of the things that we do. So in my sixth grade class, there's a point where the first couple of weeks we do some sort of like all together projects. We do like little like one-day activities. We'll do some collage with some demonstrations of acrylic paints or watercolors, that sort of thing. And there comes a point where I'm like, okay, now you've got kind of a good lay of the land. You kind of have a sense of how everything works in the space that we're in. And I present them with this challenge here. And I ask them to envision and plan and execute an original two-dimensional artwork. Like that off the bat. I think sometimes their eyes are like, wait, it has to be original? And it has to do a couple things. We're combining mediums, we're illustrating the principles of design, and this last part is the part that gets them. And I say, you have to communicate something that's personally significant, right? So it's a message or expression in your artwork that's personally significant. And that last one is where they get a little stuck. And some kids will, like, they have an idea immediately, they jump right in. They've been waiting for that all year, right? They're like, finally let us like pick some stuff, and they're gonna run and go get the stuff. And you get the other half of the class that are like crickets, right? They have no idea how to start. They don't know where to like look for inspiration, right? And so that's where like kind of I jump in with some strategies. And I say, I know I'm asking you to do a lot here. And I want you to know that I'm here to help you out. And then I let them in on my like biggest secret as a teacher. And I say, I have to tell you, I don't care about your artwork. And of course, we over dramatize the whole thing. They're like, oh, how can you not care? And I say, because I don't have to bring your artwork home and put it on my fridge, right? I see artwork all day. Who should care about your artwork? And, you know, it takes them a second to go, oh, we should care about it. And they're like, we should care about it, right? And it's that moment when it goes back to that question of like, who owns this learning, right? So when I say like, this should be for you because it's supposed to be personally significant. So it should be something that you're going to be proud of, right? So that's how we sort of set the stage. And then the strategies that we use for the students that need a little bit of scaffolding for this is this poster that I created here. And so I came up a couple of years ago with these 5 strategies that we use. And I say, you know, these can go a long way. These can help you out if you think about these. And it's, you know, it's on the wall so they can see it. And so these are what I'm going to share with you. Now before I do this, I will warn you, there's going to come a point after we go through these where I'm going to ask if you at home or in the viewing world, if you were to add a 6th strategy, what would it be? So you might want to have that going on in the back of your head while we go through this. Okay, so the poster that I share, it's the feeling stuck. So I say, do you all see that turtle that's up on the board? And they say, yes, we see. And I say, these are some strategies. If you're sitting there and you don't know what to do next, here's a couple things you can try, right? So we start with the brainstorm book bin. And I say, you know, I have this whole bin and it's like 20, 30 books in this little wooden bin. And it's all books about sort of strategies for, you know, techniques around different materials. There's a couple like books about like just questions to get you started. So it's a collection of books specifically for kind of getting through like that artist block, right? So we have that. And I say, you know, if you're somebody that likes to flip through things, this is great. Try this out. I say you can take a tour. And what I mean by that is that sometimes just walking around, see what other people are doing, it can give you kind of like that little jump start and say, oh, I didn't even know you could do that. Or you might see a material that you didn't realize we had in the art room, that sort of thing. So just walking around, getting out of your space, right? The example I'll usually say is like, you ever just take a math test and you're like staring at that one question, it's not clicking? Sometimes like the best thing to do is go to the next one and come back to it, right? So give your brain a little rest, try something else, and then maybe it'll click when you come back. So we try that. I say you can phone a friend, which I've actually learned that terminology is now outdated. I need a better one for my current middle schoolers. But I explain that this is from an old game show that I used to watch, and they've never heard of it. And I say you can phone a friend. So it's totally acceptable to ask your friend for help. And it's funny because I think a lot of times they're like, but that's cheating. And I say, no, it's just collaborating. Right? And they're like, oh, okay. So I say you can phone a friend. And I mentioned that we have a Chromebook search. Like our kids are lucky enough to have a one-to-one Chromebook accessibility at the middle school. And I say, you know, this tool is at your hands. It's just at your fingertips. You can find a YouTube tutorial. You can look online. You can find great ideas out there. It's not a bad thing. Just think of it as research. And the last thing I say, you can ask me. And so that's a little cartoon of myself. And I mentioned to him, I say, like, I don't want this list to make you feel like I don't want to talk to you. It's just, there's only one of me. So, you know, I'm there, just realize that my time is limited. And what I thought I would do, just to kind of explain what these are, is I just thought I would share some of the pieces that have been created based on some of these strategies. So the first one I started with, we had a student who was kind of just staring at the paper, like didn't really know where to start when I asked them to sort of come up with something to try. And so I handed them this Paint Lab book by Deborah Foreman. And I said, here, and I gave them kind of a stack of, I think I gave them 5 Post-its. And I said, find 5 things that catch your eye in this book. So he kind of flipped through the book and he put his Post-its in. And he ended up finding like some fun kind of squeegee based art where you kind of take a squeegee or like a flat side of a ruler, you kind of drag it over some wet paint, and then you can carve into it. So he basically set up a little paint station for himself. He's like, I'm going to try this. So he tried it, and he made like 5 or 6 pieces, and we let them dry. And I said, well, let's check them out next time you come in. And when he came in the next time, he immediately knew what to do. He started to like kind of cut it up into pieces, and he assembled this little collage made up of the dried experiments that he did based on this book. And it all came from him just like flipping through this book and finding the squeegee technique that he wanted to try out. And I think the piece, you can see it, there's a lot of vibrancy to it, and just sort of the energy of the student really comes through. And then we have a take a tour. Here's an example of how that kind of manifested in class. Oh, I forgot, I did put this in here. Have people seen this Austin Kleon book called Steal Like an Artist? If you've never seen it, or even if you have, it's worth revisiting. It's a lovely book by an illustrator, by an author who really kind of thinks really deeply about the creative process and writes really succinctly about it. It's a great book. And he has a page in his book where you'll see like good theft versus bad theft. And when we talk about taking a tour, I think the kids are often really worried that someone's going to steal their idea, or it's cheating because I don't want to copy that kid. I'm like, you're not copying, you're being inspired by, right? And we talk about I have this on a poster also in my room. It's a good theft versus bad theft. So good honor versus degrade, study versus skim, steal from many, steal from one, credit, plagiarize, transform, imitate, remix, rip off. Oh, there's remix. Somebody put that in the creativity definition. So I think it's sort of framing kind of that inspirational piece of like seeing other people doing great work and letting that inspire you rather than just trying to take their ideas. Right, so we talk about that. So the example that I want to show is like this piece. This student was, I think they were kind of into like a Zentangle thing where you kind of create little kind of doodles and kind of fill spaces with different sort of doodle pieces. So this piece was being created and I was really excited by it. And then there was another student who was a little stuck, maybe like on the other side of the room. And they mentioned that they wanted to do like just like a pen drawing. They just wanted to do something like a marker. I said, go check out what this student's doing. And so she did. And she came back like really, and just kind of sat down. She was like, I got it. And this is what she created. And you can see what she did afterwards. And you can see the connective tissue, right? You can kind of see like she kind of honed in on like the food aspect, kind of that design piece. But they're very different pieces. And you can tell like two different students kind of had different concepts of it. And I really enjoyed how it just sort of came pretty naturally from just like seeing someone else's work and being like, I got it. And like went back and created their work. All right, so for the phone a friend, you'll see later there's some peer relationships that I'm going to talk about, but I think there's something really exciting when students get to kind of find like a creative buddy who they just kind of match on the same level. And this happened actually the piece I'm going to show you happened last year. Where just a pair of students just sort of clicked when they were working together. And this idea of kind of asking each other for help, playing with ideas over and over again. What they came up with is a little video that they created of one of their inventions that they worked together on. So you can see it's a phone case, and they were trying to solve the problem of getting tired at school, and you sort of sit with your hand on your face like this, and your elbow sort of slips a little bit, and they're like, I keep doing this, and they fall and their elbow would slip. So if you look closely at the flap that opens on the phone, there's a little zigzag, like a kind of a crisscross design with hot glue. There it is. And it was meant to be sort of a grippy surface that would hold your elbow from slipping on the desk if you're putting your hand on. And the collaboration between these two students was fantastic. And it just reminded me of like, I think alone they wouldn't have been able to figure this out. But the two of them together really created something that was really unique and special. And they executed it fantastically. I think this video is a pretty good example of how they work together. And the Chromebook search, this is sort of that piece where they have this, and I've tried to create some resources for them over the years. And I think we've all probably done this where you kind of, I'm sure we all have like our bookmark sort of section on our web browser, right? Of like things that we're going to come back to and we're going to check out later, or those interest pages or like vision boards, that sort of thing. And so our students are really pretty good at navigating and trying to find inspiration. So one tool that I've created over the years, especially particularly for my 8th graders, where I challenge them to find an artist that they would kind of be buddies with. So like it's about artistic style and finding like their artist buddy, and they have to create something that they would both enjoy. So I've actually created like an ongoing, like a Pinterest page where the students are able to kind of find artists that they can be inspired by based on different sort of techniques and categories. And the example that I'm going to show you is one that happens a lot, especially with my 6th grade. I get a lot of, I'm going to skip this for a second. I'm going to come back to this. I get a lot of this. I don't know if people have seen these online, like these little tutorials. I get asked for crayons in the hot, like the hair dryer at least once a week. And I'm like, I know exactly what you're doing. Like, yeah, I saw it online. It's this thing. You can like melt the crayon. I'm like, yeah, I understand. And it, to me, in my head, that's immediately I say like, oh, that's something they saw online and they want to try it out. And I argue with them and I say like, I'm gonna push back a little bit. I'm gonna say like, if you can figure out exactly what it's gonna look like just based on a video, like what are you bringing to the table? And I challenge them to go back and I'll give them maybe some like keywords to throw into a Google search, like the word encaustic, right? So like artwork that's based in like melting wax and layering wax and mixed media pieces. I'll say, throw this word into the search next time. And I'll say like, come back and see what you come up with. So I did this for a student once and they came back with a really great idea. And this is what they ended up creating. So what they found was they found another technique where you can take crumbled up crayons and kind of layer them almost like a mosaic. And then if you melt it from above in the space, it creates these really marbled like effects, right? So she actually was able to create this after I had said, maybe we could try to dig a little deeper than the first thing. And I think it was really exciting that she was able to go back and just with a little bit more research was able to find something that I think allowed her more ownership of the process, right? You can see her hand here a lot more. You can see kind of like how she was planning out the colors and the landscape of like kind of the ocean feel, right? You can see her hand in it much more than what she was trying to originally do here. And I skipped over this quickly because I feel like this is also a really fun piece where, again, it came from sort of like a Google search where a kid sort of looked up, I think she just typed artwork about letters. I think she really wanted to do like a letter. I think that's kind of like in her head, she wanted to do something with like typography. And she found an artist who does these quilling sculptures and was able to produce this. And the fun thing was like, I had a picture of this and then like 2 or 3 years later, another student was kind of in had the same notion. I said, you know what, you can try. And I showed her the picture of the other student. And then she created this piece where if you kind of squint at it, you can kind of see that there's like a floral thing happening where it's like green and like the yellow is kind of like the center of the flowers. You can kind of get a sense of what she was creating there. But it all stemmed from this one student doing research and then sort of passing that along to students the next year and the year after that. And the final piece that asking me as the teacher, I think, this comes in some of that relationship building with the students of like kind of getting to know what a student can bring to the table is something that, because I see them for 3 years, I can kind of see that growth and that development from a 6th grade student up through 7th and into 8th grade. And it allows me a lot of times to say like, I remember the thing you did last year, or, you were in this show or you do this sport, or, I heard about this project you did. As I get to know the students, I can kind of help them kind of make those connections. And I think that's something that I think comes from the fact that I can see them multiple years. So this is an example where for that, I think I mentioned earlier, we do the invention project where you have to solve a problem. And I had a student who kind of took the instruction to be that she had to create like a prototype of a solution. She wanted a pencil that wouldn't break. She was somebody that doodled all the time and she got mad when her pencil tip would break. And she was kind of struggling to get that motivator to say like, I have to like build a prototype of a pencil that won't break. And she didn't really know what to do with that. And there were, I think, 2 classes where she just kind of stared at her planning sheet and was like, I don't know what to do with this. And it was in that moment when I said, I've seen you do like all these little cartoons and things, because literally along the outside of her planning sheet were these little characters that she was making. So I was able to say, like, I've seen you do these little cartoon characters. Is it possible they could be part of your process? And it was that question that sort of allowed that student to say, oh, yeah, I could do it. And it turned into, instead of doing a prototype of a pencil, you can see that what she did was she created a kind of almost like a storyboard for an animation or a comic strip of the story of the not breaking pencil, right? You can see it's, I lost it on here. It's like the the pencil fairy shows up. It says poof. And so just being able to connect with that student and kind of identify the things that I saw as strengths for her and allow her that freedom to say, oh, I could use that strength to achieve what I'm trying to do, and kind of pushing that avenue for that student was a really nice moment for at least for me. I don't know, for she may not have cared, but for me, I was like, oh, that was exciting. You got to do this really great like project. And another one that came up is another one where I had been to, I think it was at the SOA market. It must have been like an open market where just some like craftspeople were selling some pieces, and there was an artist who was taking old found photographs and like adding these little like monsters to the found images. And I was able to share this with a student who's just, I knew their humor would like connect with that. I said like, look, you got to check this out. I thought you would love this. And I showed her the picture, that because I bought one of the prints. And it was one of those moments where, because I knew this student would appreciate the humor, when it came time for her to create her project, she was like, I want to do that thing that you was in that artist's work that you showed me. And I think it was, again, it's because of that connection of like either asking for help or me kind of just kind of offering something just based on what I know from a student, was able to kind of like bridge that gap and like kind of jump into this really fun piece. So this is a really fun piece to me. It's actually made on like kind of like a plastic that she cut out. So it would like, she had to like glue this little monster on it. So it actually had sort of a 3D quality to it. If you look at the top of the gentleman's head, that's my favorite part, that little like tiny hint of a tentacle coming over. It's fantastic. All right, so I warned you before I got through my 5 strategies that I was gonna challenge you all to think of one. So my question for you, just kind of putting our group, think on. Can anybody, I'm going to give you about 60 seconds for this again, but I'm curious, does anybody have a strategy that they use when they're either sort of feeling stuck or they need to like get over that little hurdle of like trying something new? So I'm curious if you wanted to put a strategy in the chat after about 60 seconds or so, if you want to think about it. And I'm curious if we can add to the list that I just shared. So I'm going to challenge you to think of a strategy and then share it into the chat. Okay, I'm going to give you about a minute. All right, let's see what we come up with. And at the bottom of the slide, if you've come up with a strategy or if you have like an idea, if you still have some space on your scrap paper, if you'd like to try and think of an icon that would go with your strategy, I would encourage you to doodle it right now. See what image or icon would go with your strategy. And it looks like some people are starting to add into the chat. So someone wrote photographs or books or home albums. Oh, I like the idea of like sort of the albums, maybe like connecting sort of to like the family issue or like the relationships of people. I like that. So I'm curious, who else would like to share some strategies? Ooh, somebody said reject perfection. Ooh, that's fun. What's the phrase, like perfection? Don't let perfection be the enemy of. What's the rest? How does that go? Of the good. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Is that what it is? There it is. Okay. So someone said, go into your own head for a short while. Short-term strategy versus a long-term strategy. Think while in the shower. Oh, fantastic. Wake up with a solution. I like that. So sometimes like, it speaks to that idea of like, sometimes like the ideas hit you when you're not expecting it, right? You're like, it's when you, earlier I was talking about the taking a tour, right? Just giving your brain a break, right? Just sometimes like it just pops in. And I think the artist's job is then to be like ready for it. You know what I mean? So like you have to like learn how to, when it happens, you have to remember like how to make that happen and be open to it. Artist opening postcards. Oh, I love those. I have a whole box full of artist opening postcards. Do people know what that means? If you've ever visited like an open studio, they'll usually have a postcard or something on it. I grab a ton of those. Those are fantastic. Yeah, I'll flip through those, or like little catalogs and things that I get. Museum postcards, yep, those are great. Yeah, so great strategies here. All right, so keep them coming if you want. I'm going to move on to the third piece about peer relationships as a real way to like tap into the creative process. So we talk in I think I mentioned in the 7th grade, we do a self-portrait project. And a long time ago, I learned, like at the beginning of my career, I used to just give the students like a mirror, and we did like a pretty straightforward self-portrait. And I learned pretty early that 7th graders, just developmentally, are not necessarily thrilled with that concept. And I've learned early on that I needed to give some flexibility there. So what I've developed over time is this idea of we're doing more of a metaphorical self-portrait. That's kind of how I say it. And we try to tie it to sort of an event from their past that's kind of a defining event for them. And so we use this tool called the 6-word memoir. And I have the link there at the bottom for later if you want to check it out. But it's a fun process where it challenges students to kind of think of a story, but then earlier when I said like 6 words for your creativity design, like it challenges you to kind of condense it into like its most essential pieces, right? And we create what we call our story or our memoir, and we think about ways that we could visually represent that memoir. And so I'm sort of scaffolding this process of saying like, let's think of an important memory. Let's think about how we could visually represent it. And then pick your strongest option, right? So at the bottom here, it's a clear visual to symbolize my memoir, right? So this is kind of the scaffolding that we use in our prototype or our exploring phase of like exploring some options. And what we started to find early on was that when I did this with students, it was fine, but I was getting a lot of things like just lists of things that students liked, right? So I would say, give me 6 words of like an important memory. And I get this, I get like Netflix, pizza, Patriots, soccer, my dog, right? So it's 6 words. They'd be like, I did 6 words. And I'd say, okay, that's great. But the artwork that sort of happened was kind of like almost collage of just things that they liked. So a lot of logos and things. And I struggled to sort of like build that, to get to that place where I could push them to the next level, right? So I felt like they were doing kind of like a baseline of like just answering my assignment pretty straightforwardly. And I said, how do I challenge them to think a little more deeply about this process? And at a conference I was at in the school district, Dr. O'Reilly, who's now the principal at Happy Hollow, actually, she and I were chatting about this, and she kind of like diagnosed it immediately. She's like, well, the idea is like you're asking them to tell you about like sort of an important time in their lives, and they're like, no student wants to tell a teacher. And I was like, that is a really good point. And it was one of those moments like she knew it exactly, like immediately, and it took me a second to say like, oh yeah, that's true. Like I don't think I would have like talked to a teacher, right, when I was a kid, right? So like me asking them that, I think, was creating a boundary between us. So what we ended up doing was we talked about how you can think about who likes to talk to each other, and 7th graders love to talk to each other about anything, right? So I asked them and challenged them to sort of interview each other. And so what I would do is I would kind of role model an interview, and somebody would interview me, and I would tell about an important event in my life. And I've included it here. So I talk about like a trip that my family took where we went to Salzburg and we did the Sound of Music tour, and my oldest daughter at the bottom there like posed in the spots where like Sound of Music was filmed, right? So I use that and say like, these are sort of my like, if you were to interview me, this is what I would talk about. And then I challenge them to pair up, or trio up, and I have them sit and chat and interview each other. And what I found was that this peer-to-peer discussion or interview process was so much more engaging and rewarding for the students, rather than trying to feel like they just had to like fill in an assignment and tell me about like something that was important to them, to me as the teacher. And I found that by having them interview each other and really allowing for those peer relationships to take hold, the work that they created was so much more, like earlier we were talking about, like out of the box, like really pushing those boundaries. So what I was getting after we started doing this is people started to really dig into some like more personal stories that they really wanted to make art about, rather than just like Netflix or the Patriots, that sort of thing. So the picture here is just like, a student was talking about kind of like hanging out with their friends, just eating Nutella. So I just feel really comfortable when I'm like hanging out with my friends. So that it was two kids that had been like hanging out eating Nutella, and like that turned into this picture on the left, which is a Nutella bottle with friends on it. And then another student was just talking about just kind of how do you represent sort of like the aspirational piece of her at that time, right? So you have this sort of a more traditional self-portrait. And then a lot of students would sort of tap into like their interest in some of the sports that they do. Like, so this is a sculpture of a soccer ball. I think it was about a penalty kick or something that they took. Another one that's like, I just love this soccer ball as the sun coming up at a sunset or a sunrise. And then there was another was a kind of an abstracted like hike through the mountains, that sort of thing. And what I found by allowing the students to chat with each other is they were able to kind of get over that hump of, or that kind of break through that barrier of being like, well, I'm just doing this for an assignment, to just letting them talk about their interests and what they like to do, and like, successes or happy memories from their lives with their peers, really opened up that process for them. And for me as the teacher, it was great to be able to see that they were able to kind of push through some more things, but in a way that didn't feel like they were just kind of filling in 6 spaces so that they could, figure out the assignment for me, right? So I think for them, it became a little bit more authentic in terms of like that creative process. And then in 8th grade, they partner up for a design project where I challenged them to create a Google Doodle for an artist that they're assigned. So they pick an artist and they create a Google Doodle. And by allowing them to work collaboratively, the work really sort of kind of unfolds for the students. So these are just some examples of sort of the Google Doodles we do. And also in 8th grade, we do an independent project or an independent study where I challenge them. Again, I think if you remember back to the beginning of the speech, the 8th grade essential question is, how do you leave your mark? And some of the students really take it to heart and say, like, I really want to make something that's going to last and be there when I come visit later on, right? So as you walk through the middle school over the last couple of years, you'll see like every year we get 1 or 2 more installations of some public artwork. So these are 3 of the examples that we've seen. The one in the middle you sort of saw at the beginning of the talk, where a student took one of my favorite quotes and popped it on the wall for us. You'll see on the left, that's one that some students created with the 3 house mentors of the middle school. And then this last one on the right was installed last year. It was actually replaced one that fell apart from the year before, where we tried stickers and the stickers fell off. So the year after, like, students came along and they said, we'll make it permanent. And it's a great quote from Dr. King. It says, "The time is always right to do what is right." And I love that that's in the hall as the 8th graders enter in every morning into the school building. And so that, again, it's just, students thinking about their space in the school. How do they make it a better place than that they found it? And like really tying into each other's strengths to really pull that together is really just, it's been really fun. All right, so we covered our 3 target areas. And I do want to give a little shout out to the Slides Carnival, which is where the templates for the slides came today. And that's the information for where you can find some resources, and if you need to get a hold of me. And that's about it. So I'd love to open up if anyone has any like follow-up questions or clarifications that I can add, or if you want to share your own stories about, how you approach creativity or creating your own work. I'd love to hear it. So thank you all for joining in. And Courtney, do you have any, did you get any like questions on your end for?
I didn't, but thank you so much. I put in the reject perfection comment, and then I went looking for an icon, and I came up with the Kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, so that was my excitement for that. But also when you were talking about sort of curating your space,
Mhm.
That was interesting to me because I have my own space in my house. I'm privileged enough, but it's sort of the lowest priority and all my junk is in there. So that was making me think about more intentional creating a space to create things.
Yeah, I've been really reading that book that I shared earlier. It's really made me look at my space a lot differently, and it's been interesting, especially this year with like the restrictions on space and movement. It's been really interesting to try and like, how do I hold on to that creativity in that space and allowing that movement, and when the students really have a hard time having the freedom to move about the space.
Yeah.
But it's been interesting to think about that. But yeah, because I think it is really important. Like, how do you set that space up so that it really brings that out of people? Right? I'd love to hear from anybody else. Does anybody else have a question?
I was interested in asking about what was it like when you finally had a group of kids who had gone through 3 years of your teaching, and we're more familiar with how you would approach things and the questions you would ask, and because that's a great opportunity when you've been able to influence and expose kids to a certain way of thinking. And
right. Yeah, that's a really interesting
rewards of that final year.
Right. Yeah. So I think, because I think I said this is my 7th year. There was that period where I had sort of students that had kind of been going through with a different sort of teaching style, and I think coming in and shifting that took some getting used to. And I think it's at that point when you get to that first crew that went through all 3 years, I think it was really fun to see if the approach worked. And I feel like what I really like is like sort of that first day of 8th grade, and we switch quarterly. So I don't know if I explained that. So like, I see them for a quarter and then they switch to a different course. So that first day of the quarter, when I get a new batch of 8th graders in, having seen them the prior 2 years, they really just kind of waltz right in. They just kind of get to work. So I think and it goes back to Courtney talking about the space, right? Like the space becomes like they're there, and this is how they've learned to act in this space. And because I try to make it very open and accessible, they see it not as their space, but as space where they get to come in and sort of play. And I think it's nice to see them kind of walk in. I'm like, oh, haven't seen you for a while. It's great to see you again. So I think there's that cycling through, I think, really sort of builds from year to year, which is really exciting. And it's fun too, because I also remember a lot of times the things they did in 6th grade and they've long forgotten. I'm like, that thing you did? They're, how do you know that? And I'm like, because it was great. I love that piece. And you really pushed yourself. You tried hard. And they're like, oh yeah. So it's helpful to kind of be able to pull those stories of like, successes that I saw, or challenges that they faced, and kind of remind them that they can do what we're asking them to do.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Anyone else have any thought? Oh, Elise, yeah.
Well, this is very different from how I was taught art, and and how I know it's been taught for many, many years, and the elementary schools, and so this was really exciting for me to see. And so when they come in from 5th grade, or when they go off to high school, are there, just has art education changed that much that this is becoming more the norm? Or are there like shocks when you've, had a class where everyone's assigned the same thing? They have to draw a mountain and they all end up looking alike, and so on. So I was just sort of curious about that kind of culture shock of switching these techniques, and also how art education has changed. So.
I think it's sort of like a pendulum. Like if you study like kind of the shifts in art education, like this isn't new.
Yeah.
But it'll go away for some time, and we'll kind of go back to sort of more like I guess like, I don't want to use the word rigid, but sort of like expected outcomes, I guess I would say. Yeah. And then it'll kind of swing back, and you'll see that kind of go back and forth. I would say like I've seen a lot of shift in, like I think I mentioned earlier in my intro, I was able to help kind of share out sort of the new DESE guidelines around the arts education in the state. And a big shift when they redid them, because they hadn't been redone since 98. So they just came out, I think in 2019 or 2019, I think they were published. And in the update, you'll see that there's a lot more about kind of artistic practices as opposed to like sort of specific skills or outcomes. So it's more about how do you teach or educate learners to think more artistically and thinking about like what that actually means. So you'll hear a lot of things like artistic intent and connecting with the outside world and things like that. So I think it's really being supported by what the state is sort of asking teachers to do. And I think teacher programs are starting to push kind of more authentic learning that you see sort of in sort of like STEM projects or project-based learning, that sort of thing. So you're seeing a lot more of these sort of initiatives happening, and I think a lot more teachers are feeling more comfortable with it, because there is sort of that mystery of like, I don't know what this is going to look like, so sometimes it's a little worrisome. So it's kind of learning how to be adaptive and flexible and meeting the students where they are. Can I share a chat question that came up that said, have you ever attempted to use these approaches with other faculty not involved in art, for example English, social sciences, etc.? And if so, what level of success did you have? And I think the short answer is yes. We've tried this. We've done some professional development with this. We've done a lot of collaborative, cross-disciplinary pieces. I think I mentioned earlier that design process model that we came up with was actually people from a lot of different disciplines part of that discussion. We had some. It shows up now in like the social studies department kind of has that model in their, they do a memorial project because they traditionally go to DC for a field trip in 8th grade. And they design memorials, and they started using this design process. The science in 6th grade does a year-end STEAM project. It's called their YES project, where they kind of do like a very similar like take on the invention project that I run. So I think as different disciplines sort of take in some more kind of project-based work, I think they sort of connect with some of the things that we've been doing in the art room too. And the middle school administration, the faculty, it's an extremely supportive and collaborative environment. So I think whenever somebody has a fun idea, like they're more than welcome to let you kind of share it with everyone, and like they really celebrate what we all bring to the table. I think as a place to work, it's a fantastic and supportive, it's kind of a real family environment where everybody's just trying to do the best they can to help the students have the best experience they can. It's fantastic. So yeah, so short answer is yes. And it's gone well. So other questions or comments or clarifications from anyone?
If not, I think folks know where to find you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that my information, should I put it in here too? I don't know if anybody wants to. I don't know if you'll. Well, you can find me at the middle school, right down the street.
I'll send around an email with your email if you don't mind, and also the link to your Google Drive with all of these great resources.
Yeah. So feel free. I think I put like a handout there and like a copy of the slideshow sort of thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being a part of this. It's great to see everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
I feel bad asking one more question at last minute, but sure. How did you do art with Zoom?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we tried all the different Zoom ideas. So we've been, if you haven't been following like what the middle school is doing, we've been hybrid for most of this year. We started about 6 weeks, we were all remote, and then we moved into hybrid where we had 2 cohorts where I would sort of see, the A group would be Monday and Tuesday, and then they'd go home, and then the B group would come in for Thursday and Friday. And the way my schedule worked, I would see people on Tuesday for the A group, and then I would see the B group on Thursday. So I actually got to see most of my class. And what we would do is we would kind of zigzag. So I'd have one class with them a week Zoom, and then I would have 1 week in person.
Oh, okay.
And it took some finagling to kind of make everything kind of fit together. And any 4-day week really threw everything off because you'd like miss one of the remote days or one of the in-person days. But I think we got to a place where we were able to we would do some more like content-based things online, and then we would do sort of more of the hands-on when we were in person. And the kids were, I will say, like, the kids have been fantastic through this. I think they were so flexible and resilient, and you always got a sense that they were just excited to be doing something, right? I think they were just, they knew this wasn't ideal for anybody, and they're just like, we'll try it out. So like when we were at home, we would do sort of like, I'm trying to think of like one thing with the 6th graders, we would talk about like color theory a little bit, so we would do like a, go find something that's a warm color, and they'd run off and they'd get, something orange or yellow, and they'd come back and say, here you go. And then we would, post the pictures, that sort of thing, and create like our own little color wheel of found objects sort of thing. There's things that we could, you learn how to do. I think the tech department in the district has been fantastic. If you haven't kind of heard what they're doing, they're like moving mountains, just like trying to make sure everybody has the technology access and the training that we needed. They've been really, really supportive. So anybody that came up with a new tool or found something like, can we try this? And they'd send out a link about, here's how you use it. And you can push it out to your kids. And it was a lot of trial and error, but I think, everybody kind of approached it with the, we're going to make the best of this. And it's been tiring and frustrating at times, but I think it's been a chance for us to kind of really test out what we're doing with the kids. So it's been an interesting year. I'm sorry, there's another chat here. Oh, that was just a nice comment. Thank you for the
any more questions?
Thank you for the nice comments in the chat. So any other questions or comments, clarifications? No? All right. Well, thank you all for showing up. It's been really great to see everybody.
Thank you so
nice
much.
to like have, people here.
Yeah.
Just seeing people again is just really nice. Yeah.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks.
Everybody.
Should I stop sharing my screen so we can?
Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.